The rain drummed against the windows of serendipity like a melancholy symphony, each droplet carrying the weight of another gray November evening. Margaret Chen wiped down the mahogany counter for the third time, her eyes drifting to the ornate antique clock that had watched over her café for 15 years. 9:47 p.m. 3 minutes past closing time. She should have locked the door already. Should have flipped the vintage brass sign from open to closed. But something made her pause. Call it intuition, call it destiny, but Margaret had learned to trust these inexplicable moments that felt heavy with possibility. That's when she saw him. Through the rain-streaked window, a figure emerged from the shadows. An elderly man in a threadbare coat that had once been navy blue, but now bore the faded gray of too many lonely seasons. His silver hair caught the warm amber light from her cafe's windows, creating an almost ethereal halo around his weathered face. But it was his eyes that stopped her heart, eyes that held the depth of oceans filled with unshed tears. Harold Whitmore had been walking these streets for 3 hours, letting the cold November rain soak through his thin coat, because he had nowhere else to go. At 78, he had outlived his wife of 50. 2 years, his 2 children who lived continents away, and most of his friends. His small apartment felt like a mausoleum of memories, each photograph and keepsake a reminder of the life that used to be. The glowing windows of serendipity called to him like a lighthouse to a ship lost in stormy seas. He pressed his palm against the glass, feeling the warmth radiating from within, watching the graceful woman inside as she moved with the fluid elegance of someone who had found her purpose in serving others. Margaret's heart clenched as she recognized the look in his eyes, the same desperate loneliness she had seen in her own reflection. During the darkest period of her life, when bankruptcy threatened to steal her dreams and divorce left her questioning everything she thought she knew about love and trust. Without hesitation, she rushed to the door, her silk scarf flowing behind her like wings of compassion. The brass bells chimed their welcoming song as she opened it wide, ignoring the cold rain that immediately began to dampen her emerald cashmere sweater. "Please," she said, her voice carrying the warmth of 1,000 summer days, "come in from the rain." Harold looked up, startled. In a world that had grown increasingly cold and disconnected, genuine kindness had become as rare as shooting stars. I'm sorry. I see you're closed." "I didn't mean to." "Nonsense," Margaret interrupted gently, taking his arm with the tenderness of a daughter welcoming her father home. "A place like this is never truly closed to someone who needs warmth." As Harold stepped inside, the café seemed to embrace him with its golden light and the intoxicating aroma of exotic teas from around the world. Hand-painted murals depicted serene tea gardens in distant lands, while crystal chandeliers cast rainbow prisms across walls lined with hundreds of tea tins, each one holding the promise of comfort and connection. "What kind of tea speaks to your soul tonight?" Margaret asked, her eyes twinkling with the kind of mischief that belongs to people who understand that magic exists in the smallest moments. Harold hadn't been asked about his preferences in months. His voice cracked as he whispered, I don't know. Something warm. Something that might help me remember what hope feels like." Margaret's hands moved like those of an artist creating a masterpiece, selecting leaves from a tin labeled Golden Dragon Well, a rare Chinese green tea infused with jasmine flowers and blessed by monks in a mountain monastery. She prepared it with the ceremony it deserved, her movements graceful and deliberate, transforming the simple act of brewing tea into a meditation on compassion. The first sip transported Harold to a spring morning in 1962, when he had proposed to his beloved, Eleanor, in a garden filled with jasmine. The tea tasted like second chances, like the possibility that beauty could still exist in a world that had taken so much away. "Tell me about yourself," Margaret said, settling into the velvet armchair across from him, her own cup cradled in hands that bore the calluses of someone who had built her dreams from nothing. And Harold began to talk. For the first time in 2 years, words poured from him like water from a broken dam. Stories of his late wife Eleanor, a renowned pianist whose concerts had filled symphony halls across Europe. Tales of their travels to tea plantations in Ceylon, where they had danced under stars that seemed close enough to pluck from the sky. Memories of their children's laughter echoing through their grand Victorian home that now sat empty and echoing with ghosts. Margaret listened with her entire being, asking questions that unlocked chambers of his heart that had been sealed shut by grief. She told him about her own journey, how she had lost everything in a bitter divorce, but had found redemption in creating a space where strangers could become friends over shared stories and perfect cups of tea. Hours passed like minutes. The rain stopped and stars emerged from behind the clouds, casting silver light through the cafe's windows like a benediction from heaven. "I should go," Harold finally whispered, though every fiber of his being screamed against leaving this sanctuary of warmth and understanding. "Will you come back tomorrow?" Margaret asked, and the hope in her voice made Harold's weathered heart skip a beat. Would you? Would you want me to?" "Harold," she said, using his name for the first time, making it sound like a prayer, "I would be honored." The next evening, Harold arrived at 7 p.m. sharp, wearing his best suit, a charcoal gray masterpiece that Eleanor had chosen for their 40th anniversary. His silver hair was combed with care, and his eyes held a spark that hadn't been there in years. Margaret had prepared Earl Grey Supreme, a blend fit for royalty, served in bone china cups that had belonged to her grandmother. They talked about books, about music, about the dreams they had thought were buried forever. Night after night, Harold returned. Sometimes he brought Eleanor's recipe for lavender shortbread cookies, teaching Margaret the secret ingredient, a pinch of sea salt that enhanced the sweetness, just like how sadness could make joy more precious. Other times, Margaret would close the cafe early, and they would walk through the city's historic district. Harold, sharing stories of how the neighborhood had changed, Margaret seeing it through his eyes and falling in love with its hidden magic. Slowly, miraculously, Harold began to transform. The stooped shoulders straightened. The shuffling walk became confident strides. The empty eyes filled with light that seemed to radiate from within. He started volunteering at the local library, reading stories to children who gasped with wonder at his theatrical voices and animated gestures. Margaret, too, found herself changing. Harold's wisdom and gentle humor healed wounds in her heart she didn't even know existed. His presence in her cafe attracted other lonely souls who were drawn to the warmth they witnessed between them, a warmth that whispered that it's never too late for new beginnings. 6 months later, on a spring evening that smelled of cherry blossoms and possibility, Harold arrived at the cafe carrying a small velvet box that had been Eleanor's. Inside was a delicate silver bracelet adorned with a charm shaped like a tea leaf. "Eleanor would have loved you," he said, his voice thick with emotion as he fastened it around Margaret's wrist. "She always said that the right cup of tea could change everything." Oh, she was right. Margaret's eyes filled with tears that sparkled like diamonds in the cafe's golden light. "Harold, you've given me so much more than I ever gave you." "No," he said, taking her hands in his weathered ones. "You gave me back my life. You showed me that loneliness isn't a life sentence. It's just a comma in the story, not the final period." As they sat together in their favorite corner of the cafe, surrounded by the aroma of exotic teas and the soft glow of candlelight, Harold realized that Eleanor had been right about everything. Love doesn't end with death. It transforms, finding new ways to bless the world through acts of kindness that ripple outward like stones thrown into still water. The cup of tea that had brought them together that rainy November night had been so much more than a beverage. It had been a bridge between two lonely hearts, a catalyst for the kind of love that transcends romantic boundaries and enters the realm of souls, recognizing souls. Today, Harold and Margaret's friendship continues to inspire everyone who enters serendipity. Their story reminds us that sometimes the most profound changes in our lives come not from grand gestures or dramatic events, but from simple acts of human kindness, like offering a warm cup of tea to a stranger on a cold, rainy night. Because sometimes all it takes is one person willing to open their door. One moment of genuine connection, and one perfect cup of tea to remind us that we are never truly alone in this world. Sometimes, the most beautiful chapters of our lives begin with the simple words, "Please come in from the rain."